Hello, hello. Welcome to the third week of the Embodied Healing Holistic Wellness Conversation series, sponsored by Racial Healing and Wellness Coaching for Women. My name is Rosella Ide White, and I am one of the co-founders, and I'm joined in this conversation series by my co-founder, Nicole Newman. The purpose of this conversation series is to introduce ourselves, Racial Healing and Wellness Coaching for Women, and most importantly, to share key practices that ground this work. So if you joined us the other 2 weeks, the first week we talked about our practice of spirituality. Week 2, we talked about the practice of values. And today, for week 3, we're talking about the practice of relationships. So to be in relationship is to be connected, right? Relationship is the state of being connected. What we are talking about, though, is something called revolutionary relationships. And revolutionary relationships are connections defined by creativity, liberation, and healing that lead to the complete transformation of a person and a community. Racial healing and wellness coaching looks at relationships not only with other people, right, with others, but with ourselves, with others, and with the world at large. The goal is to create relationships that push past fear in order to experience what's possible for all. So we're very excited to engage our conversation today about relationships.
And with every conversation and what we do in every program is we do a grounding to get present in the space. And so our grounding for today comes from Black liturgies. And Cole Author Riley, the author of This Here Flesh. I encourage you to follow her on all platforms. And Cole writes, "No one is healed in isolation." Bell hooks. We have to be aware of the extent to which liberal individualism has actually been an assault on community, when the genuine staff of life is our interdependency, is our capacity to feel both with and for ourselves and other people. Bell hooks. Listen, they have wings and voices, are making choices, are using what they have. They are long aware on long journeys, each bears the other, wearing, stirring, love occurring in the middle of the terrifying air. James Baldwin from Munich, winter 1973. Inhale. I am not alone. Exhale. We will bear it together. Inhale. I belong to a multitude. Exhale. We get free together. So there are 4 practices that are integral to our work of racial healing and wellness coaching. We've talked about spirituality, we've talked about values, and tonight we'll discuss relationships. So one of our core beliefs is that all of our practices lead to possibilities. And those possibilities are both for each of us as a collective, as a society, and for our communities. So the possibility that we want to reflect on tonight is that people will become empathetic in their relationships with other white people, Black, Indigenous people, and people of color. You know, early on in my career, I had very little patience for white women. And part of that was because I understood how white women used their whiteness to both create, especially in the workplace, to create conditions for Black, Indigenous, and other women of color that were harmful, right? That could literally disrupt our livelihoods. And also because I had no history, right? I know how white women had been used by patriarchy and sometimes on their own volition to uphold systems of harm for all kinds of communities. And what happened, right, is as I started to walk my own journey of spirituality, of redefining my values, the more empathetic I became to myself, the more empathetic I became to not just white women as a monolith, right, but to individual white women with whom I was in relationship with and encountering. And how that changed me was that it made this program possible, one, right? but two is it allowed me to see, right, that even in my own life as a Black woman who was exploring my own identity, was exploring my own agency, my own lineage, how I often wanted to benefit from empathy that I wasn't willing to give, right? Is that I wanted people to understand, right, things about myself, things about my community, things about conditions. And right, it's like I'm from Washington, D.C. People come to the city and they say DC has, right, DC has no culture. DC feels like a city of transplants. And I would get really offended by that, right? I wanted people to have empathy for a city that was going through like all of this change, but had a really rich history. And I was always frustrated because I was never willing to give that empathy to other people, but I wanted it for things that I cared about. I wanted it for myself. I wanted it for my community. And that shifted, right? And the moment that I became more empathetic with myself, the more I had capacity to become empathetic with other people. And let me say that empathy and accountability are not the same, right? I can be empathetic and also hold you accountable. And so really what we encourage in our program is people to become more empathetic, that they think about how they show up in relationship to themselves, how they show up in their communities, right? Intercommunally, right? And then how they show up across communities.
It's interesting, Nicole, as I'm listening to this, the other possibility that connects directly to relationship, to the practice of relationships, is around open-heartedness. So the possibility of we become more open-hearted to our own belovedness and the belovedness of others, I think is only possible with empathy, and vice versa, right? Open-heartedness leads to empathy, empathy leads to open-heartedness. It's like they're constantly working in relationship with each other to open us up. And at the root of both of them, I believe, is the thing that is my superpower, which is vulnerability, right? To be empathetic requires a particular amount of vulnerability, right? If I am going to not just feel sorry for, but to place myself in a position of truly getting curious about how a reality, experience, situation impacts a person, right? That's what cultivates empathy. If it's not just about me saying, oh, that sucks that they're going through it, but that I'm actually being mindful and reflecting on that experience, and also recognizing how it might differ from mine, how it might be the same to mine. But all of that requires a particular level of vulnerability and getting really honest. And also, I think combating sometimes the way of being that many of us can exhibit of not believing what people say is true, right? So for me to be open-hearted and to be empathetic means that I actually have to believe what people say is true for them and how they're feeling. Now, we know that feelings are valid, even if they're not always fact, but I think that it begins with recognizing the feeling. So in this work, when we're working with white women, we can hold space, because this is our work, right, for all of the feelings that come up as white women in particular come to recognize the way that they have been used as tools to uphold and uplift and perpetuate white supremacy culture and even patriarchy. I think for Black women, right, we can provide space for ourselves and for others as we really consider empathetically the way that these systems have literally divided us from ourselves and from each other, and to hold each other in an open-hearted stance. I think with women of color, non-Black women of color, the same thing is true. We can be curious and empathetic about many people's history of migration and immigration, and how, especially coming to the United States of America, that history is also riddled with anti-Blackness that led their ancestors or forefathers, foremothers to align with whiteness because that was the way that they were going to survive. But I feel like we have to be open-hearted to the recognition that all of us are human and that we all have been abused by this system and by these structures, and that our healing and our liberation and our freedom is actually on the other side of of our relational growth with ourselves and with each other. Nicole always uses the word or phrase beloved. Like she calls our clients, right? Friends, partners, colleagues, beloved. And as we were crafting the possibilities, this open-hearted to the belovedness of oneself and to the belovedness of others, I think was a direct correlation or reflection of something that Nicole embodies and how she says it. And I don't know, I'd be curious to hear when you started using that phrase and what it means to you to call people beloved. Because for me, it's almost like it's a reminder whenever you're talking to someone or whenever I hear it that, oh yes, they are beloved, right? Regardless of what's happening. But I'm curious about where did that come up for you?
Yeah, I think some of it was just like, I'm not always good with names. So like sometimes I forget names.
If we're being honest.
If we being honest, I'd be like, what's the most respectful name that I can call you that's non-gendered, that also that like helps me to connect? So one of the things that I know about myself is that when I'm anxious and I am scared, I can very quickly isolate myself from other people, right? So if I am feeling anything about my own safety, about who I am in the world, right, I can put up walls very quickly. And so some of it was like, I don't always remember people's name and I need a way to be able to be like, hey. But some of it was also because I also don't want to walk through the world closed off.
Okay.
Right. I do need a reminder, a cue for myself that it is not me against the world. No matter what history, my own trauma, my own triggers have taught me, I need a way to connect with the shared humanity of other people quickly. And especially when like especially I think in the last couple of years where things have felt very like tenuous, right? Like things feel like hard. And so for me, that the emerging of that just became a natural byproduct of me wanting a visual cue for myself that I am not alone. I am not cut off from humanity. I am not cut off from the humanity of other people as I'm walking in the world. Right? Because I could get on the bus and my default is to close up, right? Because I'm a woman and safety and all this, and right, and I live in a city, all of this stuff, and I can close up, right? And part of it is like, I want to be connected, because if I'm connected, then I am reminded that I'm not in this alone, that we all can hold the whole. Right? That we all can be responsible for each other and take care of each other. And it also reminds me of my own belovedness. There's no way you can call somebody beloved, right? Especially someone who is of difference of you, is different from you, and not be like, well, if I believe this about this person, why I have to believe it about me.
Right.
Like I have to believe that I'm beloved too. I can't believe it for Rosella and not believe it for myself.
And so much of this work, that's why we say, like, even in the conversation about relationships, it's not about just external. It's about what we do and how we show up for ourselves. Because I think the site of practice when it comes to relationality, first and foremost, is with ourselves, which is not something I always understood or even could wrap my mind around, because I was always so externally focused, right? It was always about someone else, whether it's a romantic relationship or friendship, familial relationships. And I would say a lot of my work over the last few years has been nurturing or justice. Like I could be focused on everything out there and not be in right relationship with myself. When I say right relationship, I'm not saying right and wrong. I'm saying aligned, right? I'm saying deeply connected, empathetic, open-hearted with myself. It reminds me of that quote. We'll probably talk more about this when we think about embodiment, that if our bodies, and is it Sonia Renee Taylor talks about the bodies as being the site of trauma, but also are the site of liberation. I feel like that's true for relationships, right? Our being is probably the first place and space that, I mean, no, it is, right? That we encountered relationship first in the belly of our mother, right? Or of whoever birthed us. And even if we were not in relationship with them after that birthing, that first experience was our first relationship. And then the relationship, once we emerged with the people who were or were not our caregivers, and the relationship that we started to build with ourselves when we were no longer within the body of the person that gave birth to us. So it's like relationships and our own connection to them is a lifelong endeavor. It's a lifelong journey. And to not only engage them with empathy and open-heartedness, but again, we're talking about revolutionary relationships, right? So relationships that are connections defined by creativity and liberation and healing, that are about transformation of not only an individual, but a community. This practice is non-negotiable. Because the other reality is that in a culture of white supremacy and a culture of patriarchy, and in a culture that is the United States of America, individualism, right, and disconnection are the practices that we are raised with. And we know that if we are to be free, it has to happen in community. It has to happen through our relationships. And again, not just our relationships out there, our relationships in here, and also the way we relate in coaching. We talk about being relationship oriented, not just about person to person relationship, but about idea. Like, what is my relationship with this idea, with this value, with this way of being, and really interrogating that in order to move towards empathy and open-heartedness as we recognize our belovedness.
Well, and it's also interesting because we think that we are, I think sometimes we think that we are holding a boundary or holding a hard line by being unwilling to be empathetic or open-hearted. And what I have found for myself, this might not be true for others, is that the more closed off I am to other people, the more closed off I am to myself, right?
Absolutely.
So it's like, if I believe the world is a scary, dangerous place and everyone's out to get me, then I manifest that the world is a scary, dangerous place and everyone's out to get me.
I mean, that's confirmation bias, right? Like, that's what we believe we'll seek to confirm, or will be confirmed based on,
If I believe that there's nothing redeemable in other communities, if I believe, right, that every person I meet does not have the capacity for change or growth or transformation, or doesn't care about my liberation or freedom, right, then I will continuously find myself in situations where those beliefs are not only confirmed, but they're doubled down on. And what does that do to you over time? How do you then sustain your commitment to racial justice and racial equity if what you believe about humanity is the worst of us, right? And I'm not saying to paint rose-colored pictures, right? There are forces of evil that are trying to literally kill our communities and to like make it so it's impossible for us to live. That is real, but that threat has to be right-sized, and we don't actually fight that threat by creating more of the same.
No,
like, right, I'm like, oh, so the best way to fight like neoliberalism, capitalism, and patriarchy is to be disconnected, workaholic, fighting for justice, and not believe in anyone's capacity for change and transformation. Like, tell me how that makes sense.
It doesn't. We can't make it make sense. But that, because I think so much of our work is, nose to the grindstone, we're operating like this. We don't have the space, luxury, time to come up and just breathe, or to, not constantly be in the struggle. Then I don't think then we get that awareness. And I think what we're trying to do is to create the space to say, actually, there is another way of being, of believing, of behaving that is radical and that will get us a different result because we are doing and being different at our core. And this for us begins with relationships, right? Our relationships are key to this, along with our other practices around spirituality and values, and ultimately embodiment. Whew. Relationships, child. Both the joy of my life and the ongoing conundrum that I'm trying to figure out.
Yes,
So
the conundrum.
we'd love to hear from you, to engage with you in conversation online around this practice of relationships. And join us next Wednesday for our final conversation in this series as we discuss our final and fourth practice of embodiment. If you haven't already, please make sure to sign up to receive our free resource that is available today. It's February 15th. And it's called Bridging the Gap from Black History Month to Women's History Month. And this resource is designed to invite you to reflect on the practices that help you embody the possibilities of racial healing and wellness in your own life. And if you haven't, make sure to follow us and connect with us on social media. Currently, we're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Racial Heal Well. We look forward to joining you for our last conversation in this series. Please share, please connect with us, and we hope that you are continuing to be mindful, to be connected, to be empathetic, and to be open-hearted this Black History Month and beyond. So thanks for joining us.